everybody. Today we're going to make Kimberbell's Country Blooms pillow. This is an 8x8 pillow. The model is made in red, white, and blue. I'm going to be making mine in pink and blue today. Slight change of colors because that's what I have on hand. Let's look at what we need to make this project. This is a digital download. I'll have the link below for you. We've got our fabrics, project batting, fusible backing, light mesh cutaway, wash away topping, and here they have the wood grain embroidery leather. I'm actually going to use some fabric with fusible instead, so you'll get to see what that looks like. Since I'm using fabric instead of the embroidery leather, I'm not going to use the wash away topping today, but I will call that out as we work through the project in case you're using embroidery leather. This project can be made in a 6x10 hoop. I'll be using an 8x12 hoop. I don't have a 6x10 hoop. Let's look at the colors. I have all my fabrics cut, prepped, fusible on the back of those pieces that need fusible. For the basket, since I'm using fabric instead of the embroidery leather, I did put fusible on the back. I'm using a solid pink instead of the red. My solid colors came from my stash of solid fabrics. This is the blue that I'll be using. My background is this white. It has a pebble detail. I had a scrap of this in my stash. And this blue with the dots is a Flower House basic. It's called Peacock Dot. This is going to be for the borders and the back. The thread colors are given in glide colors. I've done a conversion to match my fabrics, so some of my threads are going to be a little bit different. As we work through the project, I'll hold up my threads so you can see them, but I will refer to the name that's given in the instructions. You'll also need a pillow insert. Kimberbell has pillow inserts. I'll link those below. I had pillow inserts on hand. This company right here is actually local. They're in Phoenix, Arizona. You can order directly from their website. They also have an Amazon shop and they make the pillows when they're ordered. I'm going to load my light mesh cutaway stabilizer in my hoop and take all of this over to the machine. We'll get started. I'm on a baby lock meridian. I have my files on USB, instructions here on my folding metal book stand. I'll have information on that below. Let's bring up our Country Blooms. You can see we have two files, 6x10 and 8x12. In our instructions, it tells us in order to fit into a 6x10 hoop, this file does not contain side tack down lines. If desired, you can use the 8x12 file instead to include the side tack down lines. This requires an 8x12 hoop. I happen to be using an 8x12 hoop because I don't have the 6x10. I'll go ahead and use the 8x12 file so you can see what that looks like. Looking at the screen, you can pretty much see the difference. We've got some lines here and here, but you can see those side tack down lines are missing, and on the 8x12 file the lines go all the way around. I'll go ahead and use the 8x12. You can watch that one stitch out. It's one file for the main part of the pillow, and then we'll be adding the borders later. The first thing we're going to stitch out is our batting placement line. It has us doing this in the color linen. My background fabric is white. I have glide white on my machine instead. I'm going to go ahead and stitch out that batting placement line. You want to grab your 7x7 square of batting, cover the placement lines. If you're using the other file, it's just going to have a line right here and right here. It's not going to be hard to figure out how to place your batting. I'm going to add a piece of tape to the top, then we're going to stitch the batting tack down line. I'm going to trim away everything outside of the tack down lines. If you're working with the smaller file, there's a picture here on page 5. Says to trim the batting close to the stitch lines. Once you've got that trimmed, you can stitch out your fabric placement lines. We're going to cover the placement lines with our background fabric. I'm using white. I'm going to take an extra moment to make sure that there's nothing on the back of this before I tape it down. I've got that down with a piece of tape up at the top. If you look at page 6, the next thing we're going to do is stitch our tack down and basting lines, and then we won't trim after that. There's a note here, if using the 8x12 file, which I am, the trimming guides will not be stitched with this step. The smaller file, it's going to stitch out some trimming guides for you. We're going to stitch our tack down, and then right after that is the background quilting. I'll go ahead and run those two steps together. The background quilting is done, we're going to start with our embroidery. We're starting with the color Mossy. I have a different color. I've got a green, and I did actually change it from the color I showed at the beginning. The one I originally pulled was almost neon green. When I got it over here in the natural light, I thought, oh my goodness, that's way too bright. I'll be using this in place of Mossy. We're going to stitch out the foliage 1 fills. Next, we're going to stitch out the crate fills in the color light tan. That's all stitched out. The next step in our instructions have us placing wash away topping over this area. It's to protect the stitches and make it easier to trim the leather. I'm not using the embroidery leather, so I'm going to go ahead and skip the wash away topping. I'm going to go ahead and change to the color Biscotti. This is the color I'll be using for that. And we're going to stitch out the crate panels placement lines. If you're using the wood grain leather, you would cover this with the wood grain leather with the grain lines running left to right. I have a piece of fabric here. It looks kind of like a basket. This is from Lori Holt's Gentler Times fabric line. I've got my Kimberbell fusible on the back. I'm going to go ahead and place that covering those lines, tape it in place, and then stitch the crate panels tack down lines. I've got one piece of tape here. If you're using the embroidery leather on top of that wash away topping, I would put at least 2 pieces of tape to prevent it from sliding. Let's stitch our tack down lines. I'm going to go ahead and remove the tape. Now this is a raw edge applique, meaning there's no additional stitching that's going to go around the outside of these tack downs. So take a little extra time, trim it, make it look nice and neat. I'm working on the trimming. I had no problems, of course, trimming right here on the outside. That was easy enough. Trimming this area that's very skinny, it's really tight, and we want to be careful because we've got stitching underneath. I had to go with the snips, and what I'm doing is I'm putting the scissors underneath and I'm sort of lifting up to make sure I don't catch the stitching underneath, then sliding the snips and then doing 1 snip. So lifting and then snipping. I'm trying to make sure I don't catch that stitching underneath. So just take your time with that, and then once you go down one side of the narrow strip, I'm almost there to the end. Let's get this to the end. It'll be easier to get this piece because you can move it out of the way. Once you've got that trimmed, we're going to switch to light tan and we're going to stitch out the crate pegs fills. The next step has us placing wash away topping over the crate before stitching out this rope fill. Since I didn't use the embroidery leather, I'm going to try leaving it off and see how that works out. We're going to switch to medium brown and we're going to stitch out the rope fill. That's all stitched out. It looks pretty good. We're going to switch to the color navy. This is the color I'm going to be using. It's a bright blue. It's even brighter on camera than it is in person. So if you're following the instructions, switch to navy. We're going to stitch out the foliage 2 fills. Next is the color celery. I've got a bright green. We're going to stitch out the foliage 3 fills. If you're following the colors in the instructions, you want to use steel blue. I have this bright blue. We're going to stitch out our flower placement line. Grab your flower 5 fabric. Mine is a bright blue. We're going to go ahead and place it, tack it down, and trim. There will be a decorative outline. It's just not going to be right after this step. So go ahead and stitch your tack down and then trim. I've got that trimmed. If you're following the colors in the instructions, they're using the color Monarch. I'm going to be using this color pink. I'm going to put that on my machine. We're going to stitch out the placement lines for flower 4 and 8. We're going to cover the placement lines with our fabric. Flower 4 is the 2.5 inch square. Tape it in place. And flower 8 is the 2 by 2 square. So make sure that that's covered, taped in place. We're going to stitch the tack down and then trim everything outside of the tack down lines. I've got these trimmed. I'm going to put this back on the machine. Same color thread. We're going to stitch out the flower 9 placement line. Place our flower 9 fabric. I'll tape it, stitch the tack down, and trim. We're going to start working on the embroidery around our applique. The first thing we're going to do is switch to steel blue. I'm using the bright blue, and we're going to stitch out the flower 5 satin outline. Next, we're going to stitch out the leaves 2 fill in the color Mossy. The leaves have stitched out. The next 3 steps are in the color Monarch. For me, it's going to be in this color pink. We're going to stitch the satin outlines on flower 4, flower 9, and then flower 8. There are 3 separate steps on your machine. I'm going to go ahead and run them together. They're all in the same color. We're going to switch to the color salmon. I picked a light pink. We're going to stitch out the flower 4 details and the flower 8 details. It's 2 steps on the machine. I'll go ahead and run them together. We're going to switch to the color navy. I'll be using my bright blue. We're going to stitch out the flower 5 center fill, flower 9 center detail, and foliage 4 detail. Next is the color celery, and we're going to stitch out the leaves 1 fills. Switch to the color monarch. I'm going to be using my pink. We're going to stitch out the foliage 5, flower 7, and flower 2 fills. Next is the color steel blue. I've got my bright blue. We're going to stitch out the buds fills and flower 1 fills. Switch to salmon. We're going to stitch the flowers 6 and the flower 3 fills. Switch to the color biscotti, and we're going to stitch out the flower 1, 2, 3, 8, and 9 centers fills. We have 2 more things to stitch out. The colors in the instruction are monarch and steel blue. I'm going to use my pink that I've been using for monarch, and then instead of the color I used for steel blue, I'm going to use my darker blue that I chose to replace navy. So I'll run these 2 steps together. We'll stitch out live simply and then bloom wildly. It stitched out great. I was a little worried about my super bright colors, but it looks beautiful. I'm going to set this aside. We'll trim this at the end. We need to stitch out our borders. We're going to have short borders and long borders for this. Let's go ahead and see what we can fit into one hooping. Here's our Country Blooms pillow, 6 by 10, 5 by 7. They should both fit. We're probably going to need at least a 6 by 10 hoop. Let's go ahead, set those, move it over, and we'll hit add, and then we'll bring up the next set of borders, which I believe said 5 by 7. Yes, 5 by 7, the short borders. Set. Looks good. I can put them a little bit closer together if I want. I'm going to go ahead and hit memory and save that to my machine. Let's hit embroidery, and it tells me I've got 8.5 by 6.7. I've got my 8 by 12 hoop right here. What I'm going to do is slide it onto my machine, and then I put my presser foot down and see if I get a green button. I have a green button. You can do this in an 8 by 12 hoop. I'm going to get my project out of the hoop, load some more light mesh cutaway stabilizer, and we'll stitch out both the short and the long borders. I've got my stabilizer in my 8 by 12 hoop. It's going to do the long borders first because that's the first file I dropped in. The color they call for in the instructions is called Space. I'm going to be using this bright blue. This is going to look good with the fabric I picked for my borders. I'm going to get this on my machine. The first thing we're going to stitch out is a batting placement line. I've got my bright blue thread ready. If you're following the instructions, use the color Space. My machine is going to stitch out the long borders first on this side of the hoop. Let's stitch out the batting placement line. I'm going to bring my hoop towards me. You should have a longer piece of batting. You want to go ahead and make sure that those lines are completely covered. I'm going to put a little piece of tape at the top and a little piece of tape at the bottom, and then we're going to stitch out the batting tack down line. The tack down lines have stitched. We need to trim away the extra batting outside the tack down lines. So you've got to get rid of the piece here in the middle and then the pieces on the side and the outside. Once you've got that trimmed, you can stitch out the fabric placement line. We're going to go ahead and place our fabric. Make sure you cover the placement lines. And then I want to add tape at the top, and I'll add a piece at the bottom. Then we'll stitch out the tack down and trimming line. We won't trim it, then we'll stitch the quilting. I'll go ahead and run those two steps together. The long borders are stitched out. I'm going to do the same exact process for the short border. I'll go ahead and do that off camera. We've got all of our pieces, our pillow front, long border, and short border. Let's start by trimming our pillow front. Got my rotating cutting mat. I'm going to be using my orange pop rulers. Our pillow front trims to 6.5 inches square. Got the 6.5 inch orange pop ruler. I'll make sure these are linked below for you. I'm going to put the next largest size outside of that. Gives me some room for my hands. Once I've got that lined up, I like to use my little quilting clip tin as a weight just to help give it a little bit of extra stability so it doesn't slide. I'm right-handed, so I'll be cutting over here. Left-handed, you'd cut on this side. You put your blade into the notch all the way over, as far over as you can get, because there's a little bit of wiggle room in the notch. You want it all the way over to the side. Trim notch to notch, and then we'll turn, and we'll go all the way around. That's all trimmed. If you don't have the orange pop rulers, you would just trim right on those stitching lines. Let's trim our borders. We'll go ahead and start with the short borders. If you look in the instructions, it tells you to remove your project from the hoop. Use the trimming guide stitched in direction step 9. Here's our trimming guides right here. You're cutting on the line. So you're going to cut on the line here and all the way around. So between and all the way around. These are going to trim to 6.5 by 1.5. I think a lot of us have a standard 6.5 by 12.5 inch ruler. You can lay down your strip like this and center this and you'll get your 6.5. I'm taking the line right here, lining it up with the stitching. I can feel the stitching line there and right there. I'll go ahead and trim top and bottom. Once the top and bottom are trimmed, we need to trim here, here, and here. I'm going to line up a line on my ruler so I know that's nice and straight. I'm going to look for that stitching line, make sure my ruler is straight or straight as can be. Sometimes they come out a little bit crooked. Don't worry about it if they do. I'm going to flip this around, trim this edge, do the same thing, line up, make sure it's straight across the top, find that stitch line, line that up with my ruler, and then we have the line down the middle. It should be 1.5 inches. Here's the line right there, 1.5. Let's look. Yeah, looks good, 1.5. Going to make sure it's nice and straight. Line that up and trim. And then we'll trim our long borders. We're going to trim the long borders the same way. They're 1.5 inches wide, same width, 8.5 inches long. I'll go ahead and trim that off camera because we just did that with our short borders. Let's assemble our pillow. You've got your short borders, the pillow front, and the long borders. We're going to put the short borders on the sides, and then the long borders are going to go on the top and the bottom. Before I sew the borders on, there's something I noticed about these. They're not the same. This border strip has a big star and ends with 2 lines. This border strip has 2 little stars and ends with 2 lines. Your longer borders are not the same design between each of the borders. What I did was I looked at the picture on the cover. The top border on the picture ends with this in the upper right corner. See that design with the 2 little stars? That one is right there. Then the border that's going down this direction is this one with the open top and the 2 little stars at the bottom. That is that border. The bottom border in the picture, I had to get online and zoom in. The bottom border here ends with this big star. I can see 2 little lines and the big star like that. And then the side border on the instructions, it's got a little V at the top. Here's the little kind of like a V. and your star at the bottom. That's how all the borders are arranged in the picture. Now I'm ready to go to my sewing machine. I definitely want to clip these into place so that when I carry this over to my machine, I don't get my borders messed up. In all honesty, it probably doesn't matter, but when I notice things like that, I always try to share that with you. That way, if you want yours exactly like the picture, you can do that. Let me go sew these two seams. Here's my two side borders. I went ahead and pressed out toward the borders. After you sew them on, that's the direction it wants to go. We need to sew on the top border and the bottom border. Same thing, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance, then press. All 4 borders are sewn on. I went ahead and took a minute and went around the edges with my ruler, trimmed off a little bit to make sure that this was nice and square. We're going to work on the back. You've got 2 pieces for the back. They're the same size. I need to iron mine. We're going to select one piece. What you're going to do is fold it in about 1/4 inch. I'm going to fold a little bit bigger so you can see what I'm doing since I'm doing this on camera. So pretend that's 1/4 inch. You would press that and then you would fold it in another 1/4 inch and press and make it nice and flat. That gives you a clean edge. Then you'll go to your sewing machine and put a little top stitch, which just means a straight stitch along the edge to anchor that down. I'll go ahead and do that and bring it back and show you what it looks like. Here's the side that I double folded and then I added a top stitch. You want to do the same thing with your other piece of backing fabric. You'll do that 1/4 inch fold twice and do your top stitch. I've got my second piece. Go ahead and grab your pillow front. There's a couple ways you can do this. In the instructions, they have you overlapping by placing one on the top, it's right sides together, and one on the bottom like this. And then pinning or clipping to hold it in place and going all the way around. I actually prefer the opening for my pillows to be sideways and not top to bottom. I'm going to place my first one like this. See how it's sideways? And another thing I also like to do is I like to stitch these pieces on one at a time. I find that I get better results. I can see what I'm doing. I think it's easier. So I'll clip this into place, go to my sewing machine, and go all the way around with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then once that piece is secure, I'll take my next piece, place that on top, and then go around this piece. And I will go back and forth here and back and forth here because this is the top piece, and then we're going to flip it right side out. I've got my backing pieces sewn on. I did go back and forth to make sure this is tacked down nice and tight. If you like, you can clip corners to reduce bulk. I'm going to go ahead and flip it and put the pillow insert in and see how it looks. I find that clipping the corners doesn't always produce all that much of a better result. I'm going to use this purple Thang, Thang, to help me press the corners out. This is all stuffed. Let's flip it to the front. I'm gonna peek. Ooh, it looks good. Here we go. This looks great. The biggest thing I'm noticing is having done this basket with fabric, I do have a little bit of fraying since I didn't use the embroidery leather, but it looks good. Let's look at the border. We've got the stars over here. This does look nice, the way that got sewn in. These 2 little stars are visible. Here's the big star here, 2 little stars here, and the big star there, and then this edge got sewn in. That looked good. I'm glad I took the extra time to compare that to the picture. I hope you've enjoyed making Kimberbell's Country Blooms 8x8 inch pillow with me. The product is linked below. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. A special thank you to everybody who's been using the links. I'll have more videos soon. If you make the pillow, comment below. Let me know how it turned out. Thanks for watching. See you next time.